Way back in 2013, Disney Animation decided to make a movie that was a spin-off of the Cars movies. It was going to be straight to DVD before someone decided that it deserved to be released to theaters. I assume this was because they thought they could make more money this way, because the quality of it definitely did not make it theater quality. It's not like the movie is incredibly terrible or anything. I wouldn't call it interesting in the slightest, but I would call it the kind of movie that would distract a kid for an hour and a half. You know, the perfect kind of movie for a straight-to-DVD release. Unfortunately, if you think about a lot of the movie, even a little bit, and I assure you I did a lot more than that, a lot of the choices they make are a bit questionable. For those of you that don't know, Planes is about a crop duster called, as a subtle reference to his job, Dusty Crophopper. Dusty dreams of being a racing plane and racing in the Wings Around the Globe race. But of course, that's difficult, because he's not built for that kind of thing. How do they get around this issue? Well, at first, he doesn't, which I think is actually really interesting. Dusty trains a lot in an attempt to get better, but only gets past the qualifying rounds because a few planes' engines busted while flying, and one of them used illegal performance drugs and was thus disqualified. I actually really like how they acknowledge the luck required to even make it to that point. The only reason he wins the race at the end is through the help of the friends he made along the way. It's through looking at these friends, and enemies, and the storylines that come from them, culminating in the big finale at the end, which I have even more issues with, that we can discover why I really don't like this movie. We'll start with Skipper. Skipper is the trainer of the movie, and his thing is that he was in the war. He fills the role of the grumpy old mentor and trains Dusty in how to race, because Dusty doesn't really know how to fly fast. His way of training Dusty comes from his time in the war, and throughout the movie he gives example after example of missions he had with his squadron, the Jolly Rogers, and gives lessons from those missions. Unfortunately, we later find out that Skipper had actually only flown one mission as a Jolly Roger. On this mission, Skipper was flying with a bunch of rookies and went down for a closer look at the enemy ship, and then they all got shot up, leaving Skipper the only one alive, though unable to bring himself to fly again. Dusty feels that this revelation is an absolute betrayal of trust, especially since Skipper said the Jolly Rogers had a motto which meant fly for truth, which definitely wasn't something Skipper was doing. Then again, Dusty isn't exactly much of a truth teller himself, but that's okay. This of course sets off the third act argument, breakup, misunderstanding, whatever you want to call it, which of course ends with the two of them coming back together for the finale. But it's kind of a weird reunion. See, I feel like normally someone is seen as doing something wrong and everyone leaves them, and then at the end, the characters that left come back and help the character who did something wrong as a way of forgiving them. But in this movie, Skipper's the one who did something wrong, but he's also the one that comes back to save the day in the end. Like, yes, you got the story beat technically, but I think you switched the characters around there, which makes the scene just a little less emotional. The thing that's much more emotional about the scene is the fact that Skipper's flying for the first time in a long time, and kind of more importantly, that he's saving Dusty's life. Because, yeah, Skipper's big entrance at the end is because Racer Ripslinger and his goons, Ned and Zed, tried to kill Dusty. Now, may I remind you, this is a movie about racing. It's not like Cars 2 or anything, it's just the main character wants to win a race and does. That's supposed to be the movie. But of course, we gotta have conflict that doesn't involve Dusty's fear of heights, or the fact that he's a crop duster trying to race with the best of the best, or him helping all the other racers with their problems, or his relationship with his friends, or the fact that he's a liar and a hypocrite. No, we need a rival, a guy who's probably going to win the race if Dusty doesn't win it, and who's just the worst. Now, the Cars franchise has already had a rival that was just the worst, and that was Chick Hicks in the first Cars movie. And you can tell that the writers of Planes were really inspired by Chick Hicks, because Ripslinger is also green and likes to assault every other car to win the race. However, Rip and Chick are different in a couple ways. See, while Chick was more of an assault everyone who gets in the way kind of guy, because all he cares about is winning, Rip is more focused on assaulting one guy, Dusty, because he's an elitist prick who thinks a farmer boy doesn't deserve to win a race. The other difference is that Chick is a car racing around a track, while Rip is a plane racing across oceans, which means his assaults are just a bit more deadly. Then again, this doesn't really seem to bother Rip, as he tries to get Dusty killed not once, not twice, but pretty much 3 separate times. The third attempt, which is on the final leg of the race, is the scene where Skipper makes his grand return, and is mostly there for the emotional payoff of that subplot, and to get Ned and Zed trapped between some rocks as their comeuppance. The second attempt to kill Dusty is the most successful, as Ned and Zed chop off Dusty's antenna as he's flying over the Pacific Ocean, and he gets lost and almost drowns in the waves of the storm, ruining his entire body. But the first attempt to get Dusty killed is much worse emotionally, because it involves his love interest, Ishani. But before we get to Ishani's betrayal, I feel as though I need to discuss something that's really important to me, in a segment I'm gonna call, Can We Please Stop Sexualizing Planes? Now, listen, I can appreciate the beauty of planes just as much as anyone, but going to the point of sexualizing— wait, wrong kind of plane. Okay, that's better. Now, listen, I can appreciate the beauty of planes just as much as anyone, but going to the point of sexualizing them is terrible. And boy oh boy does planes sexualize planes. Worse yet, it's only the female planes being sexualized. Now, would it be better if the male planes were sexualized too? Well, in the interest of equality, yes. In the interest of I don't want to see any planes sexualized, no, not really. In general, and I don't think I'm in the minority here, I just don't want to see any planes sexualized. You know, it's just generally not my thing. But too bad, apparently, because we have about as many sexual jokes in this movie as we did in the first Cars movie, and that one had 2 cars flash lightning. First, we have Dusty look at Ishani's ass as she leaves, which of course is a classic we had in Cars 1 too. But this time, Dusty mutters to himself about Ishani's nice-ass propeller. We also get a scene where Ishani gets to show off her— well, I'm hesitant to call them legs because it's mostly the wheel, but we get a nice panning shot of her sexy landing gear, because I'm sure that's what people wanted. We also get Dusty calling Ishani aerodynamic, but like, in a flirty way, which isn't necessarily wrong, but I feel like I should bring it up anyway. And hey, Dusty's friend, the Mexican stereotype El Chupacabra, seems to think that that's very good flirting. But then again, I'm not sure if that makes it better or worse, as he seems to fall in love with someone's ass first and their wings second. Worse yet, El Chupacabra's attempt at pursuing his own love interest, a racing plane named Rochelle, are questionable to say the least. Now, to be fair, Rochelle does seem to playfully reject his advances the first time he tries to talk to her, but all the other times, not so much. In fact, every time El Chupacabra tries some pickup line on her, she gets more and more annoyed. That of course doesn't stop El Chupacabra from constantly pursuing her, and eventually, with the help of Dusty, of course, she completely falls in love with him, with like a deep sexual passion, according to the scene that happens the morning after when El Chupacabra shows up like this. This honestly makes me more uncomfortable than the random sexual shots because it just promotes actual bad behavior. And thus ends the segment called Can We Please Stop Sexualizing Planes? Because we've gotten a bit off topic here. Going back to Ishani and trying to get Dusty killed, apparently, if Dusty is to be believed, Ishani has a really nice propeller. But I guess it's not nice enough because Ishani would get someone killed for a better one. See, what happens is Ishani and Dusty go on a nice date flying about and everything, and they talk about the next leg of the race, which is supposed to be above the mountains. Now, because Dusty is afraid of heights, Ishani recommends a pass through the mountains that would let him fly a lot lower, which seems nice enough until you find out that it was actually just an attempt to get him killed by a train or a tunnel or something. Technically, she says her goal was actually to get him to turn around, but I have a feeling Rip, who told Ishani to do this, his goal was to get him killed. Why did Ishani do this? Well, because Ripslinger offered her a new propeller for her troubles, so we know how her priorities work. Now, of course she gets redeemed by giving Dusty the new propeller when his breaks, but, I don't think that would cut it for me. The only positive thing I can say about Dusty and Ishani's relationship is that it doesn't last till Planes 2, so maybe Dusty realized she's not the best for him. The only other racer who's relevant in this movie is Bulldog, a British plane who doesn't believe in helping other people, as this is a bulldog-eat-bulldog world, and it's every man for himself. He, along with Rip, showcases a lesson the movie leans into a little bit, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about some of the stuff I actually like about the movie. Because, again, this movie isn't all bad. I like Skipper and how, if you look closely, you can actually tell that Skipper is making up stories of his adventures based on his facial expressions. I like his fear of flying and getting over that. I like Dusty's fear of heights, especially how they visualize it and him getting over that. I like how Ashani does actually feel remorse for almost killing Dusty and tries to at least kinda make up for it. It's not a whole lot, but it's something. And I like the lesson that Bulldog showcases that being kind to each other is more important than winning. Bulldog starts by saying every man for himself, but Dusty saves his life by telling him how to fly when his engine spurts oil into his eyes. It's because of this Bulldog realizes helping people is important and helps Dusty win the race at the end of the movie. And how does Bulldog and the rest of the racers that aren't Rip Slinger and his goons help Dusty? Well, after he almost dies because of Rip's second murder attempt, Dusty can't fly anymore because all of his parts have been destroyed. So all his new friends get together and give him new parts. It's an emotional scene, and even Ashani gives him the part she almost killed him for. Oh, romance. Now, you may be thinking that that's just a nice finale to the lesson about being kind to others, as now all his kindness has been returned. But that's not actually the case. Instead, the lesson revolves around a character named Franz, so much so that he's the one that just straight out says it during the end of the movie. Franz is an interesting character. He's a fan of Dusty, but his big thing is that he's a car that can turn himself into a plane. He also has an entirely different personality and goes by a different name when he's a plane, so I think something went wrong during the building process, but that's besides the point. The point is that Franz, like many of Dusty's fans, want to believe that you can
do more than just what we were built for.
And this is the main lesson of planes, that you can do more than you're built for. And I know it's the lesson of planes because it's dramatically said right after Dusty's big win near the end of the movie as we zoom out. And even Dusty says it near the beginning of the movie. Now, the fact that Franz, a vehicle that was originally built to be a car and a plane, says it is pretty bad, but fine. Dusty is a crop duster and becomes a racing plane and wins a race. That is technically doing more than he was originally built for. But there's a couple issues with this. First off, what in the world does that mean for real people? In a surprising twist, the audience of planes aren't planes. They're humans, and humans aren't built. And while technically people are born differently, maybe along the same lines as the difference between a crop duster and a racing plane for Dusty, we're definitely not at the point of being as different as a car and a plane are from each other like Franz. I guess it could mean that you can do anything you set your mind to, even if others say there's no way, which kinda works, but that brings me to my other issue. Dusty did not win this race because he tried really hard and succeeded. Dusty won because he stopped being built to crop dust, and also because Rip Slinger tried to kill him. And that's the weird thing about Rip Slinger, there was no reason for him to do all that work to stop Dusty from winning the race. Dusty probably wouldn't have won it if he had just been left alone. Let's go through this, shall we? First, Dusty does not make the trials to get into the race in the first place. This makes sense because he's a crop duster who's trained for a few months trying to race against racing planes that have probably trained their whole lives and are, built for it. The only reason he gets in is because one of the qualifying planes was using drugs and got disqualified. Okay, so one lucky break to start the big race. Not reassuring for his chances in the rest of the race, so he's clearly going to need to do a bit more to have any chance of winning. Part of this is training with Skipper, but the other part is when Dottie, the mechanic of the airfield, does something to his engine, I think? I don't know, something about more torque meaning more speed. They don't really explain it, and I don't know anything about planes. What I do know is now, even before the big race, Dusty is one step removed from being a crop duster, and one step away from not being built like he used to be. Now, the big race is split up into 7 legs. In the first leg, Dusty comes in last place because he's scared of heights and doesn't take the jetway that gives him any kind of speed. And also he's flying low in Iceland, so his wings freeze over. In the second leg of the race, Dusty comes in last again because he saves Bulldog's life. But to be fair, he was doing pretty well before that happened, because the race was more of an obstacle course than a race, and Skipper trained him well in that. The third leg of the race is the first time Dusty does really well, going from last, which I believe is 21st, to 8th. But the reason he does so well is in part because he removes his sprayer. You know, the thing that makes him a crop duster. So again, Dusty is slowly becoming less and less what he was initially built for, and instead becoming built to race. As an added side note, for some reason, the writers decided that Dusty would act like getting his sprayer removed was like getting his balls removed, and I just don't understand why. Like, do they think runners remove their balls in order to reduce drag? Again, this is a kids movie about planes. Why does Dusty's voice crack after getting his sprayer removed? In the fourth leg, Dusty wins by a lot, but only because Ashani suggests a shortcut that's supposed to get him killed, and instead of him dying, he succeeds in taking the shortcut. So that one's on Ripslinger, and they even admit it in the movie. The fifth leg of the race is pretty much skipped over, but Dusty does just barely manage to keep his lead, which is admittedly impressive, though I have a feeling part of that is because of the massive lead he got in the previous leg. Dusty doesn't actually finish the sixth leg of the race, and it's only partially his fault. See, leg 6 has Rip's goons go for murder attempt number 2, where Dusty gets lost in the middle of the Pacific because Ned and Zed chopped off his antenna. It's only after getting found by the US military that Dusty refuses to fly above the raging storm for too long and almost dies. The only reason he's allowed to continue on the last leg of the race is because getting his antenna tampered with was not his fault. Then again, I feel like ruined engines, the reason a few other planes didn't finish the race, aren't really their fault either, but Dusty's the main character, so whatever. Now, apparently there is actually a benefit to almost dying and having all your parts pretty much destroyed. And that's that all your friends will give you much better parts that are actually meant to be used for intense flying, like military-grade wings. And thus completes Dusty's transformation from being built to dust to being built to race. This, of course, allows him to win the seventh leg of the race, winning the race as a whole, but just barely. See, Rip tries to kill him again, which feels more like it hinders Rip than anything. Then we get proof that Rip is still the faster plane, because of course he is, he's the best racing plane in the world, as both Dusty and Rip go their fastest, and Rip is faster. The only reason Rip loses is 1, because he forgot tailwinds existed and didn't use them, and 2, because he's such an egomaniac that he slows down right before the finish line so the audience can get a good shot of him, allowing Dusty to pass him. So let's recap. Dusty wins 3 legs of the race. 1, because he takes a shortcut that was recommended to get him killed. Another, because it's right after the one and he's so far ahead anyway. And the last, because he's literally built different and his rival is stupid. And that's my issue. I don't mind that Dusty gets lucky or uses Rip's ego against him as long as they acknowledge that that's what's happening, which they kind of do. What I mind is that the entire movie feels like it's about Dusty doing more than he was built for, but the way he manages to do more is by not being built that way anymore, which completely defeats the purpose. Rip even says,
"Bolting on a few new parts doesn't change who you are."
But the problem is that yes, in this case, it literally does. You can't say he's more than he's built for if he's literally built to be the more now. That completely ruins whatever kind of message that was supposed to be. And that's my main problem with planes. It's not that everything they do is bad, or that the lessons they're trying to teach are bad, even if I don't really understand them too well. They're just implemented so poorly, and they focus on what I think is the wrong lesson. And to make matters worse, they have stuff like El Chupacabra being a problem and almost being romanticized. It's just like, you had a chance, guys. You had okay ideas. This could have been theater quality. It was not.